For 6 years, my husband was hailed by his entire family as the ultimate devoted son. He was the golden child, the steadfast pillar of support, the man who never hesitated to open his wallet when his parents or sister needed help. There was only one problem. Every single dollar he used to buy their respect and adoration came directly from my bank account. My name is Clara. I am 42 years old, a senior project manager for a commercial real estate firm in suburban Chicago. And for a very long time, I believed that love meant quiet sacrifice. I have always been a pragmatic, level-headed woman. I grew up in a household where you worked hard, saved meticulously, and took care of your own. When I married Julian, a charismatic and image-conscious mid-level executive at a marketing agency, I knew he came from a different background. His family, his parents, Richard and Evelyn, and his younger sister, Maya, were close-knit, loud, and constantly entangled in each other's dramas and financial woes. Julian always presented himself as the polished, successful man of the family. He cared deeply about how he was perceived, especially by his parents. Early in our marriage, he instilled in me a philosophy he claimed was the bedrock of our union. A husband and wife must know how to sacrifice for their loved ones. He never outright demanded that I pay for his family's expenses. Instead, he possessed a masterful, insidious way of making me feel that refusing to help would be a supreme act of selfishness. And so, the quiet sacrifices began. Over the years, I became the invisible engine powering his family's comfort. Every month, I transferred a substantial portion of my income to cover Richard and Evelyn's rent after they downsized to a townhouse they still couldn't quite afford. When Maya was struggling to make ends meet, it was my autopay that kept her car insurance from lapsing and my savings that bailed her out of a high-interest personal loan. When Richard needed out-of-pocket dental surgery, when the townhouse's HVAC system failed in the dead of winter, when Evelyn casually mentioned how wonderful a family trip to Florida would be, it was my debit card that swiped, my credit line that extended, my bonuses that vanished. Julian's refrain was always the same, delivered with a reassuring squeeze of my shoulder. They'll appreciate both of us for this. Clara, we're building a foundation of family loyalty. It's what good people do. But the appreciation never extended to me. At every Sunday dinner, Thanksgiving feast, and birthday gathering, Richard and Evelyn would raise their glasses to Julian. They would tearfully thank their wonderful, generous boy for taking such good care of them. Maya would hug him and call him the best big brother in the world. I would sit quietly across the table, swirling the wine in my glass, listening to them sing his praises. Julian would adopt a humble, aw shucks demeanor, graciously accepting their gratitude without ever once mentioning that the check had my signature on it. I noticed the omission, of course, but I repeatedly convinced myself that I was being petty. I told myself that the reputation didn't matter, that keeping the peace and ensuring his family was safe was the mature, loving thing to do. I didn't need the applause. I just needed my marriage to be a partnership. Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday evening in late October. My mother called me in tears from Ohio. My father, a retired mechanic who had proudly worked with his hands his entire life, had suffered a severe heart attack. He survived, but he required an emergency quadruple bypass surgery, and the recovery was going to be long and incredibly expensive. Their Medicare wouldn't cover all the specialized rehabilitation he needed, and their small savings were already dwindling. My heart shattered for them. These were people who had never asked anyone for a dime, who had worked themselves to the bone to put me through college. That weekend, we had a previously scheduled family dinner at Richard and Evelyn's townhouse. My nerves were frayed. my eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and constant phone calls with doctors. Over dessert. As Evelyn happily chattered about a new patio furniture set she had her eye on, I finally spoke up. I told them about my father's condition. I took a deep breath and looked at Julian, stating plainly that I would need to divert a significant amount of my funds over the next few months to help my parents cover the medical bills and keep their house. The dining room went dead silent. Julian's jaw tightened. The charming, easygoing facade he always wore around his family instantly melted away, replaced by a cold, calculating annoyance. He set his fork down sharply, the clink echoing in the quiet room. He looked at me, then looked at his parents, and finally spoke. "Clara, your parents are your responsibility," Julian said, his voice loud and firm, ensuring everyone at the table heard him perfectly. "Your money is your business. You handle it however you see fit. But do not drag me into it. We have our own obligations here." I sat frozen. I looked at Richard and Evelyn, waiting for them to intervene. I waited for them to remind Julian of the tens of thousands of dollars I had poured into their lives, to tell him that family helps family, just as he had always preached. But Evelyn merely looked down at her coffee cup, taking a tiny sip. Richard cleared his throat and muttered something about how medical bills in another state were certainly a complicated personal matter. Maya actually nodded in agreement with Julian, whispering that it was important to maintain boundaries. They didn't defend me. They agreed with him. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my napkin on the table or storm out of the house. The intense, burning betrayal I felt crystallized instantly into an icy, profound clarity. I looked directly into Julian's eyes. "So?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm and quiet. "Whoever's money it is gets to decide exactly how it is spent." Julian crossed his arms, looking triumphant, believing he had successfully shut down a nagging wife in front of his audience. "Exactly. That's how it should be." I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile, it was the kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Okay. I understand perfectly." The tension left the room. Evelyn eagerly resumed talking about the patio furniture, and Julian poured himself another glass of wine, satisfied with his victory. They all thought I had conceded, that I had accepted my place. But in my mind, in the span of those 60 seconds, my entire marriage had fundamentally, irrevocably shifted. The foundation hadn't just cracked, it had disintegrated into dust. That night, Julian slept soundly, his breathing even and relaxed. I did not sleep. I slipped out of bed, padded down the hallway to my home office, and locked the door. I turned on my computer and opened a new, blank spreadsheet. Then, I began to pull the records. I logged into every bank account, every credit card portal, every automated payment system I had set up over the last 6 years. I pulled up archived emails and old tax documents. I went through the statements line by line, month by month, year by year. The numbers began to add up, and the sheer scale of my own willful blindness terrified me. There was the monthly round assistance for Richard and Evelyn, $1. $200 a month, multiplied by 72 months. There was Maya's car insurance, $350 every 6 months. There was the personal loan I paid off for Maya, $8. Wu-Bai. There were the emergencies, the HVAC repair, $4. Lambe. The dental surgery, $3. eBay. The endless stream of groceries, utility bills, and impromptu gifts. There were the Florida vacations, which I had funded entirely. assuming Julian was contributing from his own account. Only to realize he had been transferring money out of our joint checking while I replenished it from my personal salary. As the dawn light began to creep through the blinds, I hit the sum button at the bottom of the column. The number staring back at me on the glowing screen made me physically nauseous. It was over $214. Ling ling ling. I had given away over $200,000 of my hard-earned money, sacrificing my own peace of mind, delaying my own retirement investments, all to subsidize a family that looked at me like a stranger the moment my own parents needed help. But the money wasn't even the worst part. While searching through our shared computer for an old invoice, I stumbled upon a folder Julian had left unsynced, containing backups of his text messages and emails to his family. Morbid curiosity took over, and I opened them. What I found was a lie so massive, so deeply entrenched, that it took my breath away. I found emails from Julian to his mother, explicitly stating that he had just received a massive bonus at work and was thrilled to pay their rent for the year. I found text messages in a group chat with Maya and his father where he wrote, "Clara is throwing a fit about me helping you guys again. She can be so incredibly stingy. But don't worry. I'm putting my foot down. I'll make sure the money is wired tomorrow." I found Facebook messages where he claimed he was draining his own personal savings to ensure his parents could live comfortably, painting himself as a martyr, sacrificing his own financial security for their well-being. He hadn't just remained silent and passively accepted their praise. He had actively, maliciously orchestrated a narrative where he was the savior and I was the cold, greedy antagonist trying to stop his generosity. He had used my money to buy a pedestal for himself, and he had built that pedestal on my back. I closed the laptop. The woman who had walked into that office at midnight was dead. The woman who walked out into the morning light was entirely different. I did not act impulsively. I did not confront him over breakfast. I poured his coffee, kissed him on the cheek as he left for work, and then I picked up the phone. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved with the silent, lethal efficiency of an assassin. I took time off work and began assembling my team. I met with a financial advisor to understand exactly what liquid assets I controlled. I met with a forensic accountant to trace every dollar Julian had moved. And most importantly, I met with a ruthless, highly recommended divorce attorney. We scrutinized everything. I confirmed which accounts were solely in my name, which I had the legal right to freeze, and whether any of his family's debt was legally tied to my social security number. Thankfully, Julian's arrogance had been my saving grace. He had never wanted his name or mine officially attached to his parents' lease or Maya's loans, preferring to just funnel them cash so he looked like a benefactor rather than a co-signer. Furthermore, the accountant uncovered something else. The final nail in the coffin, Julian's own salary, which he claimed was constantly being eaten up by investments and business expenses, was sitting untouched in a high-yield private account in his name only. He wasn't poor. He was hoarding his own wealth while bleeding mine dry. I was ready. On the 28th of the month, 3 days before the first of the new month, I struck. I logged into my banking portals and initiated a mass execution of automated payments. I canceled the wire transfer for Richard and Evelyn's rent. I canceled the auto draft for Maya's insurance. I canceled the secondary credit cards I had issued to Julian. I revoked his access to our primary joint account, transferring exactly 50% of the funds to a newly minted, secure account at a completely different bank, leaving him his legal half of our shared checking. But not a penny more. Every single cent that was scheduled to go to his family was immediately redirected into an emergency medical fund for my father, a legal retainer for my lawyer, and a private savings account for myself. I did not leave a note. I did not send an email. I merely enforced the very rule Julian had established in front of his entire family. My money was my business, and I was deciding how it was spent. The dominoes began to fall on the second day of the new month. I was at my desk at the firm, reviewing a logistics contract, when my cell phone rang. It was Evelyn. I let it ring 3 times, took a sip of water, and answered with a perfectly pleasant tone. Hello. Evelyn. Clara. Dear. I'm so sorry to bother you at work, she said, her voice laced with a nervous, trembling edge. But the landlord just called. He said the rent transfer didn't go through this month. I tried calling Julian, but he's in a conference all day. Could you just log in and check the system? It must be a bank error. Oh. It's not an error, Evelyn, I replied smoothly, leaning back in my leather chair. That money comes entirely from my personal account. Julian made it very clear at dinner 2 weeks ago that my money is my business, and that we all need to handle our own responsibilities. Since I am now fully funding my father's heart surgery, I've decided to stop paying your rent. You'll need to speak with your son about how he plans to cover it. There was a stunned, breathless silence on the other end of the line. Your personal account? She finally stammered. But Julian said. Julian's bonuses. Julian lied to you. Evelyn. Have a nice day. I hung up. 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a frantic text from Maya. Clara. My insurance agency just emailed me saying my policy is canceled for non-payment and they're reporting me to the DMV. What did you do to Julian's card? I replied immediately. I canceled my card. Julian told me to focus on my own family's obligations. You should ask him to pay it from his private account. Best of luck. By 3 o'clock. Richard had left a blistering voicemail demanding to know why their shared utility accounts were suddenly kicking back insufficient funds notices. By 5 o'clock, Julian's secondary credit card had been declined at a business lunch. When I arrived home at 6, Julian was already there. He was pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. His face flushed, a dangerous shade of crimson. His tie loosened and askew. His phone was buzzing incessantly on the granite countertop. He rounded on me the second I walked through the door. What the hell have you done? He roared, the veins in his neck bulging. Are you insane? My mother is having a panic attack. Maya is screaming that she can't drive to work. My card was declined in front of 3 potential clients. You've completely lost your mind. I calmly set my purse down on the entryway table, took off my coat, and hung it up. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of cold water, and looked at him. I haven't lost my mind, Julian. I'm just following your instructions. You're the one who told everyone that my money is my business, and I shouldn't drag you into my family's financial issues. I took your advice to heart. I'm focusing my resources on my parents. You vindictive, petty bitch. He spat, closing the distance between us. You're doing this for revenge. You're humiliating my family just because you got your feelings hurt over one little comment. I'm not changing the rules, Julian, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I'm just finally playing by the ones you set. My family is different, he yelled, slamming his hand on the counter. They rely on us. We had an agreement. How are they different? Julian, I asked, tilting my head. Explain it to me. Why is your mother's patio furniture a joint marital obligation, but my father's open-heart surgery is a personal burden I have to bear alone? He opened his mouth to shout something, but no words came out. He floundered, his face contorting, as he desperately searched for a justification that didn't exist. Before he could formulate a lie, his phone rang again. It was Richard. Julian snatched it up and stormed out to the backyard, barking frantically into the receiver, trying to manage the catastrophic collapse of the illusion he had spent 6 years building. The climax arrived 3 days later. Julian had spent the intervening days alternating between enraged demands that I restore the accounts and pathetic, manipulative pleas that we needed to act like a team to save his parents from eviction. I gave him nothing. Finally, he orchestrated an intervention. On Saturday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Richard, Evaine, and Maya standing on my porch, looking like a tribunal. Julian stood behind them, arms crossed, trying to project an air of authority. I invited them in. They took their seats in the living room, the atmosphere thick with tension, anger, and a heavy dose of entitlement. Evelyn was the first to speak, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, instantly adopting the role of the wounded matriarch. Clara, we have always treated you like blood. We welcomed you into this family. I simply cannot understand how you could be so cruel, so heartless, to cut us off without warning. We are terrified. Richard leaned forward, his face stern, playing the morality card. Marriage is about compromise. Clara, family helps family. Julian has always broken his back to provide for us. And the fact that you are holding his money hostage out of spite is disgraceful. A good wife supports her husband's obligations. Maya Chimedin, her voice dripping with venom. You know I need my car to get to my shifts at the hospital. If I lose my job because I can't drive, that is entirely on you. You're being incredibly selfish. Julian stood by the fireplace, playing the weary mediator. Listen. Mom. Dad. Maya. I'm trying to handle this. Clara is just going through a difficult emotional time with her dad, and she's taking it out on us. Clara, please, just turn the accounts back on, and we can go to counseling. We can fix this. I let them finish. I let the silence hang in the room for a long, agonizing moment. Then, I reached beneath the coffee table and pulled out the heavy, 3-inch thick black binder my accountant and I had assembled. I dropped it onto the glass table with a loud, resounding thud. I'm glad you're all here, I said, sitting back in the armchair, because there seems to be a massive misunderstanding about how this family has been functioning for the last 6 years. I opened the binder. In this folder, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room, are the bank statements, wire transfer receipts, canceled checks, and credit card logs spanning our entire marriage. Every single document is certified. In the last 72 months, I have personally paid out exactly $214,380 to cover this family's rent, loans, medical bills, insurance, and vacations. Evelyn blinked, looking at the binder as if it were an explosive device. What are you talking about? Julian paid for all of that. He told us he was using his bonuses. Did he? I asked. I flipped to the second tab in the binder, which contained full-color printouts of Julian's text messages and emails. I slid a stack of them across the glass table toward Richard and Evelyn. I want you to read those, I commanded. Richard picked up the top sheet, adjusting his reading glasses. I watched his eyes scan the page. It was an email Julian had sent 2 years ago, stating that I was furious about paying for their Florida trip and that he had to fight me tooth and nail to secure the funds from his own secret stash. Now, I continued, I want to ask all of you a very simple question. Before you sit in my house and call me selfish, before you demand that I continue to fund your lives, I want you to tell me, where exactly did you think that $214,000 came from? The room fell into a deathly stillness. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Richard looked up from the paper, his face pale, the color completely drained from his cheeks. He looked at Julian. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. Maya stared at the binder, her eyes wide with shock. Julian panicked. The slick, polished executive vanished, replaced by a cornered desperate boy. That's our joint money, he stammered, stepping away from the fireplace. We're married. What's mine is hers and hers is mine. I just handled the logistics so you guys wouldn't have to worry. She's twisting the truth. Turn to tab 4. I instructed Richard, ignoring Julian completely. Richard shakily turned the pages. Tab 4, I said, shows the routing numbers. Every single payment came from an account solely in my name, funded exclusively by my payroll deposits. Julian never contributed a single cent to your rent, Maya's loans, or your vacations. In fact, if you look at tab 5, you'll see the records of Julian's private, high-yield investment account, where he has been hoarding his entire salary for the last 6 years, letting me shoulder the burden of his manufactured generosity. The illusion shattered entirely. The impact was physical. I could see the truth hitting them like physical blows. Evelyn looked at her son, her golden boy, and saw him for exactly what he was. She realized that every tearful thank you, every toast, every moment of pride she had felt for him had been a lie built on my exploitation. She looked absolutely humiliated, shrinking back into the sofa. Unable to meet my eyes, Richard's expression hardened from shock into profound disgust. The man he had praised for his responsibility and devotion was nothing more than a fraud who had stolen his own wife's money to buy his father's love. You lied to us, Richard rasped, his voice trembling with a terrifying, quiet rage. You let us believe. You let us treat her like. Maya burst into tears. For years, she had viewed me as the cold, distant sister-in-law who begrudged her brother's kindness. Now, she realized that the woman she had just accused of being selfish was the only reason she had a car to drive and wasn't buried under predatory loan debt. Clara, I had no idea. She sobbed. I swear to God. He told us he was paying for it. But even in the face of absolute, undeniable proof, Julian couldn't let go of his ego. He couldn't accept the destruction of his image. Instead of apologizing, instead of falling to his knees and begging for forgiveness, he doubled down, his narcissism blinding him to reality. You had no right to go through my private emails, he screamed at me, pointing a shaking finger. You violated my privacy. You're trying to destroy my relationship with my family over money. You've always been obsessed with money. I kept that private account to protect us because you spend recklessly. It was the final, pathetic gasp of a drowning liar. He cared more about the fact that he was exposed than the fact that he had destroyed his marriage. He didn't care about the pain he caused his parents, the manipulation of his sister, or the financial abuse he had inflicted on me. He only cared that his mask had slipped. I stood up. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt nothing but a cool, refreshing emptiness. I am filing for divorce on Monday, I announced, my voice echoing in the silent, tense room. Julian, you have until the end of the week to pack your things and vacate this house. The mortgage is in my name, and the down payment came from my premarital assets. My lawyer will be in touch regarding the division of your hidden accounts. I turned to his family. Richard. Evain. Maya. I am not doing this to ruin you. I am simply stopping the funding for a lifestyle you could never afford in the first place. You will have to figure out how to live within your actual means, just like the rest of the world. Please leave my house. The fallout over the next few months was swift and brutal. Without my invisible subsidies, Julian's family crashed back into reality. Richard and Evelyn were forced to break their lease and move into a much smaller, cramped apartment 2 towns over that they could actually afford on their fixed income. Richard had to sell his newer car and buy a rusted 10-year-old sedan. Maya had to take on extra night shifts at the hospital and move into a shared apartment with 3 roommates just to cover her own bills and pay off the debts. Julian was no longer hiding from her. The Florida vacations evaporated. The spontaneous dinners out ceased. They began to live exactly the life their own income dictated. Julian fought the divorce. Of course, he fought dirty, trying to claim a share of my retirement, trying to paint me as the villain in mediation. But the paper trail was too strong, and the judge had zero patience for his hidden investment accounts. In the end, he was forced to surrender a significant portion of his hoarded wealth to compensate for the marital funds he had fraudulently funneled away. His reputation was in tatters. His parents barely spoke to him, the shame of his deception permanently fracturing their relationship. As for me, I took the money I recovered in the settlement and the monthly income I was no longer bleeding out, and I put it exactly where it belonged. I paid off the remainder of my father's surgical bills in one lump sum. I hired a specialized in-home physical therapist to come to their house in Ohio 3 times a week. I paid a contractor to finally fix the leaking roof on their porch. And I set up a robust health savings account for their future needs. When I flew out to visit them for Thanksgiving, the contrast was staggering. We sat around their worn oak dining table. The meal wasn't extravagant, there was no crystal or expensive wine. But the warmth in the room was genuine. My father, looking tired, but stronger every day, reached out and took my hand. His eyes were wet. "Clara. Sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do all this. You've given up so much for us. I don't know how we'll ever repay you." My mother nodded, squeezing my other arm. "We never expected this from you, honey. We just wanted you to be happy." They didn't expect it. They didn't feel entitled to it. Their gratitude was raw and real, completely opposite to the smug, expectant entitlement I had endured for 6 years in Boston. "You don't owe me anything, Dad." I smiled, feeling a genuine, profound peace settle over me for the first time in nearly a decade. "You're my family. It's my money. And this is exactly how I want to spend it." Later that evening, as I was helping my mother clear the plates, my cell phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up, displaying a text message from Julian. It had been months since the divorce was finalized, but occasionally, in his moments of lonely desperation, he would reach out, still trying to spin a narrative where we could somehow be friends. "Can we talk?" the message read. "I miss you. I think we made a mistake." I stared at the glowing screen for a few seconds, listening to the sound of my father laughing at the television in the next room and the comforting clatter of my mother loading the dishwasher. I didn't feel a single flicker of regret. I didn't feel the need to argue, to explain, or to seek closure. Julian had always told me that my money was my business. He never anticipated that one day I would actually believe him. And in doing so, I realized that my life, my peace, and my future were my business, too. I picked up the phone, blocked the number, and placed it face down on the counter. Then, I picked up a stack of plates and walked back into the warmth of the kitchen. Finally free.